Hey everyone, today I am here answering another question that I get a lot this time of year. And typically the question is I get an email or a message on Facebook or something, and somebody says, what can I feed my goat to increase its weight? And many times people are not asking the right question. And this is a example of that. If your goat is underweight, it's not because you're feeding it the wrong food in most cases. I'm sure there's cases where people are feeding it something horrendous. But, you know, every time anyone has ever contacted me about this, it was not about what they were feeding the goat. It wasn't even about how much the goat was eating. In fact, sometimes these goats are eating a lot and they're still skinny, which is why they think that they're just not feeding them the right things. If we're talking about a goat here that's more than a few months old, the answer to this question is that the goat usually has a problem with parasites. So if it's a kid between 3 weeks and 5 months of age, and it also has diarrhea, that is probably coccidiosis. But otherwise, typically roundworms can cause goats to be very underweight. And you can feed them anything and everything in the world and let them eat until their belly is so huge that everybody's asking you when their babies are due. But you feel along their spine, they are what my daughters used to call a spinosaurus. They're very skinny. Their tail looks like a rat tail rather than being a triangle, meaning that it's got a good amount of meat at the base and then tapers off to a point at the end. Those are goats that are underweight. You can see their ribs. You can see their hip bones really, really prominent. The short ribs across the chine are very prominent. Just all the bones are very sharp. Those goats, and a lot of times they will have a big belly. So like, that's the other thing I get sometimes is people are saying, oh, they think, oh, my goat kids are fat. Like there's, like the kid, they have a 4-month-old kid and it weighs 15 pounds. And you're like, oh, but it's so fat because it has a big belly. Well, the reason it has a big belly is because it's eating and eating and eating because it's starving to death, because 15 pounds for a 4-month-old kid is terrible. And that is a kid that this all started because the kid didn't get enough milk, because 15 pounds is what a Nigerian should weigh when it is like 5 or 6 weeks old. They should be 20 pounds by 8 to 10 weeks if they're getting enough milk. If they're not getting enough milk, you are setting them up for chronic coccidiosis. I've got another video on that topic. So here I really just want to focus on the adults that people email me about and say that the goat is underweight. The other thing too is if you have a doe that is in the first couple months of lactation, also be sure that you're feeding her enough grain. I've had a few people contact me recently that had does in milk, and they were not feeding enough grain. On the flip side, I had somebody feeding a doe twice as much grain as she should have been, and the doe had diarrhea. So it's really important that you weigh the feed that you are giving your milkers, and it needs to be a 16% dairy goat feed, or not dairy goat, just goat. Actually, I don't even like some of the ones that are labeled as dairy goat. They're not the best. It needs to be 16% protein goat feed. You cannot feed them cob, corn, oats, and barley. That's got half that much protein. You're going to have a very skinny goat if you do that and she's in milk, or she's not going to be producing a lot of milk. Does in milk they'll either, if you're not giving them enough, they either won't produce enough or they'll get really skinny. If their body has a really huge will to milk, their body is going to crank out all the milk in spite of the fact that it is having to pull from its own reserves, and the goat's going to get super skinny. So feeding a goat feed to your milkers that is 16% is very important. And you need to feed them 1 pound of goat feed for every 3 pounds of milk they're producing. Now, some people ask me like, well, my doe is feeding kids. I don't know how much she's producing. Well, you can estimate. So I have a whole article on bottle feeding kids that talks about how much milk kids need. So just because I know these numbers well, I'm going to go with my Nigerian dwarf numbers, but you can do the numbers for your larger goats too. So a Nigerian dwarf kid is going to peak by a month of age. It's going to be needing about 1 quart of milk a day. And 1 quart of milk is about 2 pounds. So if a doe is nursing twins, that means that she is probably producing, if she's nursing twins and the twins are gaining 4 ounces a day, that means she's probably producing about 4 pounds of milk a day. And so that's would be, so if she gets 1 pound of goat feed for every 3 pounds of milk, that would be about 1 1/3 pounds of goat feed that she needs. All the goat feeds are going to weigh slightly different. Okay. But just as an example here, I do have the numbers for alfalfa pellets. Alfalfa pellets, a pound of alfalfa pellets is 2 3/4 cups. So close to 3 cups. So if your goat feed is, 2.5 cups to 3 cups for a pound, then your doe if your doe is nursing twin Nigerian dwarfs, and you're assuming she's making about 4 pounds of milk a day, then that means she needs 1 1/3 pounds, which would be about 3.5, 4 pounds cups. That'd be about 3.5, 4 cups of goat feed that you need to give them. So I hope this has been helpful. That is so. And remember the first thing too that I said, if you came in late, I see we have a lot of people here now. If you came in late, the first thing I was talking about is that if you have an adult goat that is skinny, the first thing you want to think about is parasites. That's usually the reason. And it's some kind of roundworm. All of the dewormers available kill all of the roundworms. So if your goat, and anemia is only caused by the barber pole worm, but there are other roundworms, the bankrupt worm, the black scour worm, the brown stomach worm. So in fact, the bankrupt worm is called that because it makes goats really, really skinny. So a lot of times people think that this is one of the most common questions that people get wrong on the FAMACHA exam is the barber pole worm does not usually cause diarrhea. But some of the other roundworms do. And it's possible for a goat to have more than one kind of roundworms, but it really doesn't matter because any of the dewormers will kill any of the roundworms. So if you have a goat that you're feeding her enough, so I just went through all of the feeding numbers a minute ago. And alfalfa is very, very important. Alfalfa has twice as much protein in it as grass hay. So your milkers really need alfalfa. You can't give them grass hay and expect them to do well, especially if they're a big producer. If they're a mediocre producer, then you can get away with not feeding them as much protein. But your really good producers are going to need more protein. So that means alfalfa hay as well as a 16% goat feed. So I hope this has been helpful. If you're watching this later and you've got questions, feel free to post in the comment section below and we'll respond. Take care.